I never expected it to happen the way it did. There were no obvious signs like lipstick on the collar or late-night phone calls. In fact, Lorraine seemed more affectionate in the final months of our marriage than she had been in years. She kissed me longer before work, laughed at my jokes, and held my hand. It felt like we were reconnecting, but it was all a lie. The truth didn't come out dramatically. Instead, one evening at the dinner table, Lorraine quietly confessed that she had been seeing someone else. It shattered my world. In that moment, I remained composed. I felt a sudden numbness, as if I was observing a scene detached from myself. My grip loosened in hers while I tried to process her words. All I could manage was a simple why. She gently pressed my hand, attempting to provide solace. We had met only 6 months ago. It felt like an accident, like stained coffee on a white shirt or an unexpected storm on a sunny day. I gazed at her, seeking the woman I married, the one who vowed eternity. Physically, she stood before me, yet she seemed like a stranger. There were no pleas for forgiveness, no apologies. She informed me she was leaving, and just like that she departed. There were no requests for comprehension, no dramatic gestures. A packed bag sat in the hallway, a suitcase I had not noticed until then. I didn't inquire about her destination, and she didn't offer the information. With a kiss, she left. She kissed me on the forehead, looked into my eyes, and whispered, "You're a good man, Walter, you always have been." And then she disappeared. I sat at the table for hours, staring at the uneaten meal before me. The fork in my hand remained motionless, and the food turned cold, mirroring the state of my life. In the following weeks, I went through the motions on autopilot. Work, home, bed, repeat. I kept my turmoil to myself, avoiding explanations and pity-filled conversations. My marriage had ended abruptly, without the dignity of a fight. She had made the decision for us both, and so I let her go. Or so I tried, but months later, as I began patching my life together, Lorraine returned. She expected me to welcome her back. The moment I saw her again is etched in my memory. It was one of those silent evenings when life began to feel normal, once more, the emptiness no longer deafening. After a day at work, I arrived home, and I had just taken off my shoes and was preparing to relax with a glass of whiskey when I heard a knock at the door. The knocking wasn't frantic, but steady, with a rhythm that felt all too familiar. In that moment, I hesitated. Ever since Lorraine had left, no one came to my house unannounced anymore. I had transformed into the type of person others treaded carefully around, unsure of what to say. The invitations for drinks with friends had dwindled, and the concerned check-ins had ceased. People moved on. That's just how life goes. However, this knock pierced something sharp through my chest. When I finally opened the door, there stood Lorraine. I almost didn't recognize her, not because she looked different. She didn't. Her hazel eyes, auburn hair she used to grumble about for being too frizzy, and that familiar posture, always leaning slightly to one side, remained the same. It was the expression on her face that caught me off guard. She appeared lost. For months I had imagined what I might say if I ever saw her again. Would I be distant? Slam the door shut? Demand explanations? Ask if he had abandoned her? Why had she left me instead? I just stared Walter. Her voice was soft and careful. "Hi." I almost laughed. "Hi," like we were old friends running into each other at a grocery store. I didn't invite her and didn't move from the doorway. She hesitated, then exhaled. "Can we talk?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to turn around and go back to my whiskey and pretend this wasn't happening. But there was something in her voice, something that sounded almost like regret. Almost. I stepped aside. She walked in like she had never left, like this house was still hers. She even glanced toward the kitchen, as if expecting to see the dinner table where she had once sat across from me, and told me she was leaving. I closed the door and folded my arms. "What do you want, Lorraine?" She swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed unsure of herself. "I made a mistake," she said finally. I felt something inside me go ice cold. She must have seen it on my face, because she rushed to explain. At that moment, I believed I was making the right choice. I thought I needed something different, something more. Her breath quivered, but it was all a facade. "Walter, everything was a charade." I remained silent. I wasn't sure how to react, because a part of me had anticipated this moment, yet now that it had arrived, it didn't evoke the emotions I imagined. She continued speaking. She paused, shutting her eyes momentarily before continuing. He wasn't the person I thought he was. I thought I was opting for happiness, but all I did was ruin the one thing that truly mattered to me. Her voice trembled slightly. I anticipated feeling vindicated. I expected to feel like she was finally facing consequences. Instead, all I felt was drained. I ran a hand over my face. So what do we do now? You suddenly appear here after months and expect me to do what? Forget the past. She glanced up at me, and I could discern it in her eyes. She had presumed that. She assumed I would remain the person willing to welcome her back, the person who loved her deeply. He was willing to do whatever it took to repair what had been shattered. That man was a thing of the past. I shook my head. You departed Lorraine. It wasn't just a simple exit. You left a trail of destruction in your wake. And now you want to return as if none of it ever occurred. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. I don't have anywhere else to go, she confessed. That admission hit me hard. It wasn't out of pity for her, but the realization that she had always had a place to return to. This home, this life, me, and she had tossed it aside. Stepping back, I opened the door again. Maybe you need to figure that out, I suggested. She stared at me, shocked. I thought she might argue, plead, or admit she was mistaken, and that we could work things out. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded slowly, walking past me into the night. I didn't watch her leave. I simply closed the door. That night's sleep eluded me. Even after Lorraine had walked away into the darkness, the scene played on a loop in my mind. Her again. The way she had looked at me, like a woman who had finally understood the weight of her own choices. Like someone who had spent months convincing herself she was right, only to realize too late that she had been terribly, disastrously wrong. And now, after all that time, she had come back. For what? For me? The thought should have made me angry. Maybe a part of me was angry, but mostly I just felt hollow. Because when she left, it had gutted me. Every part of me had been wrapped up in her, and when she was gone, it felt like she had taken pieces of me with her. The nights had been the worst. Staring at the empty side of the bed, wondering where she was, if she was happy, if she even thought about me at all. I had been through hell. I had crawled my way back from the pit she had thrown me into, and now she wanted to talk. I sat on the couch staring at the half-empty glass of whiskey I had abandoned when I answered the door. The ice had melted the drink, now more water than liquor, but I didn't drink it. I sat there clutching the glass so tightly that my fingers ached. It wasn't just the recent hours that troubled me. It was the culmination of everything leading to this pivotal moment. I had poured my love into Lorraine wholeheartedly, offering her every piece of myself, unwavering trust, only for her to casually express during a dinner that she desired something new, something different. Without a second thought, she walked away from our life, devoid of any tears. And yet months later, she reappeared at my doorstep, admitting her mistake. I wanted to believe that her words, coupled with the remorse evident in her eyes, would somehow provide closure. However, that hope was futile, as no amount of regret could erase the fact that she had chosen to depart, leaving me unsure whether forgiveness was even an option. The following morning, I awoke feeling disoriented, my mind burdened with the events of the past. With minimal sleep, dragging myself out of bed felt like navigating through a haze of emotions. In a daze, I mechanically went through the usual motions: showering, brewing coffee, and then sitting at the kitchen table. There I found myself staring at my phone, contemplating whether or not to reach out to someone about what had transpired. But the thought of confiding in those who had witnessed my struggles, those who had offered support during my lowest moments, left me uncertain. Would they simply advise me to forget about her, to move forward and never look back? Although their counsel might be rational, the haunting memory of her vulnerable expression from the previous night lingered in my mind. What had caused this shift in her demeanor? She seemed lost, a stark contrast from the determined woman who had left me months ago in pursuit of something more. As these thoughts consumed me, my phone suddenly rang. I hesitated before answering, feeling an inkling of anticipation about who might be on the other end of the line. The assistant told a customer to wait there, as they would return shortly before leaving to help another patron. I've never gotten over her. Maybe deep down some part of me still wanted to see if any piece of the woman I had loved was still there. Whatever the reason, I found myself standing outside a small cafe 2 days later, my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets as the wind bit at my skin. She had picked the place, neutral ground somewhere public, as if that would somehow make this easier. But nothing could make this easy. I spotted her before she saw me. She was sitting at a table by the window fidgeting with a napkin, her nails tapping anxiously against the surface. She looked nervous, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to the woman who had walked away from me without a second glance. For a moment, I just stood there watching her, wondering if this was a mistake. Then, as if sensing me, she looked up. Our eyes met through the glass, and I saw it again. That same lost expression from the night she had shown up at my door. I exhaled sharply, then pushed the door open. She straightened as I approached, but she didn't smile. Neither did I. "Did I, Walter?" she whispered. I sat down across from her, reclining in my chair with my arms crossed. "You wanted to talk, so talk," she swallowed, nodding. "Right." She glanced at her hands and then back at me. "I don't even know where to start." "Try the beginning," I said flatly. I had no intention of making things easier for her. After all, she was the one who had requested this meeting, not me. She bit her lip, hesitated, and finally began to speak. "When I left, I thought I was doing the right thing," she uttered with a shaky breath. "I convinced myself that what we had wasn't enough anymore, that I needed something different. And when I met him, I thought he was, I don't know, exciting, new. He made me feel." She trailed off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I was wrong." I remained silent, observing her silently. She took another breath, her hands clenching into fists. At first, everything seemed perfect. He made all these promises, made me feel like I had made the best decision of my life. But it didn't take long for the... I heard cracks in her voice as she spoke. It seemed to deepen as she revealed that he wasn't the person she had thought he was. Describing him as controlling and jealous, she explained how he wanted her to conform to a version of herself that she wasn't. When she started standing up for herself, he lost interest, abruptly treating her like a discarded toy. Despite the pain he caused, she tried to maintain a blank expression. After leaving him, she found herself alone in an unfamiliar city with no support. Realizing the gravity of her actions, she confessed remorsefully to me. Looking into her pleading eyes, she admitted her mistakes and acknowledged that she didn't deserve anything from me. After a long silence, I responded, my voice steady but soft. "I waited for you," I admitted. "Every day I hoped you would return, but eventually I had to learn how to live without you. I had to rebuild. Every time you tore something apart," she recoiled. "I see, Lorraine. I don't believe you understand." Leaning in, my tone turning colder, "You made a decision, a purposeful choice to walk away. You packed your things, said your goodbyes, and left. And now, after all this time, what do you expect? Forgiveness? Another opportunity?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't expect anything. I just..." She paused. "I hurt. I miss you." A bitter laugh escaped me. "You miss me, Lorraine? You didn't just abandon me. You broke me. You shattered my trust, my love, everything I thought I knew about you. And now you miss me." Shaking my head, "You don't miss me. You miss the security, the familiarity, the version of me who would have done anything to make you stay." She blinked back, tears, a solitary drop trailing down her cheek. "I don't know how to mend this. You can't." My voice was resolute, final. A weighty silence settled between us for a prolonged moment. Amidst the din of the cafe, clinking cups, murmurs of conversation, our little enclave seemed wrapped in a deepening stillness. Shakily she exhaled and nodded. "I understand." I pushed my chair back, standing up. Good as I turned to leave, she spoke. "One last time, Walter." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "Did you ever hate me?" Her voice was so quiet, so fragile, like she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. I hesitated, then said the truth. "No." Then I walked away, and this time I was the one leaving her. As I walked away from that cafe, I expected to feel something. Closure, relief, maybe even satisfaction. But I felt nothing, just an odd numbness, like my mind hadn't caught up with the weight of what had just happened. Lorraine was out of my life again, and this time it was on my terms. So why did it still feel like a loss? The city was alive around me. Cars passing, people talking, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. But it all felt distant, like I was moving through a world I wasn't really part of. I found myself walking aimlessly, not toward my car, not toward home, just walking. And as I walked, my mind drifted back to the beginning. The life I had created with Lorraine came crashing down when she decided to walk away from it all. Our meeting was serendipitous, a chance encounter at a friend's gathering where we connected over casual conversations and budget-friendly drinks. Lorraine possessed an infectious laugh and a natural charisma that drew people towards her. Before I knew it, she had woven herself into the fabric of my world seamlessly and swiftly. Our marriage, initially smooth sailing, was filled with joy and shared moments. Inside jokes, late-night heart-to-hearts, and blissful Sunday mornings spent in each other's arms. I was convinced of her love, so blind to any impending change, believing in the permanence of our bond. However, love doesn't vanish without a trace or fade away promptly. Lorraine must have harbored doubts long before she vocalized them, aching for something different without disclosing her true feelings. Despite this, she allowed my unwavering affection to persist until the very moment she made her decision. She had reached her breaking point. What I couldn't overlook was not the affair itself, not even the betrayal, but the deceit. Knowing that I had spent years loving someone who no longer loved me was difficult to accept. I paused in my steps, realizing I had unconsciously wandered into a small park. A bench sat nearby, partly concealed by the shade of a tree, and I lowered myself onto it, letting out a slow sigh. This should have marked the conclusion. I should have been able to move on from her. But life doesn't always follow such a straightforward path. Just as I was beginning to release my grip on the past, it surged back into my present. It all started with a phone call. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and reflexively I took it out, anticipating a random call or an overdue message from a coworker. However, upon seeing the name displayed on the screen, my stomach twisted. It was Lorraine's mother. I hesitated. Since the divorce, I had not engaged with her, and I was uncertain about doing so now. Yet something about the timing, about Lorraine reemerging in my life, about this call, coming at this precise moment, prompted my fingers to move before I could second-guess myself. I hesitated before answering hello. There was a brief pause before a soft, strained voice spoke. "Walter?" It sounded like she had been crying. Concern crept into my voice as I asked, "Is everything all right?" After a moment of hesitation, she finally replied it. Something cold crept up my spine at her words. "What about her?" I asked, my tone unintentionally sharp. There was another pause before she said quietly, "She's in the hospital." The words initially didn't register as my mind struggled to comprehend. "What? She collapsed?" I asked in disbelief. They suspected it was due to exhaustion, dehydration, and stress. But then came the shaky admission, "She's not doing well, Walter." I ran a hand over my face, feeling my pulse quicken. "Why are you telling me this?" I inquired, my voice reflecting my confusion. Her mother's whisper shattered the silence. "You're the only one she's been asking for." I was struck dumb by the revelation. As I gazed out at the peaceful park, watching the serene sway of the trees and the oblivious passers-by, I felt the world tilt on its axis. Lorraine in the hospital, calling out for me. Despite all the pain and betrayal, why would she want me? Why was I even considering going? I should have refused. I should have informed Lorraine's mother that whatever was happening to her daughter was no longer my concern, that she had made her own choices, and I was not going to step in and act as the man she had abandoned. Yet I did not decline. Instead, I sat on the park bench, clutching my phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and I listened to her mother's voice tremble with barely contained emotion. "She doesn't have anyone else, Walter," she said. "I know that might not mean much to you, but please, if you ever cared for her even a little, just come see her." The words, "if I ever loved her," pierced through me. Despite everything, there had been a time when loving Lorraine was all I knew. I had centered my entire existence around that love, only for her to shatter it and leave me in ruins. But that love had once existed, and that's why, against my better judgment, I found myself outside the hospital an hour later, gazing up at it. At the fluorescent lights glowing against the darkening sky, I almost didn't go in. I had driven here on autopilot, my mind replaying every memory of Lorraine that I had buried deep. Our wedding day, the first time she had told me she loved me, the moment she told me she was leaving, the way she had looked at me when she showed up at my door months later. Full of regret, but still expecting something I wasn't sure I could give. And now she was in there, somewhere beyond those sliding doors, lying in a hospital bed. I didn't know what I expected to feel, but it wasn't this. Not the rapid heartbeat, not the sweat on my palms, not the overwhelming sense of déjà vu, like I was about to walk into something I couldn't come back from. But I went inside anyway. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and something faintly metallic, the kind of scent that settles into your lungs and lingers. The waiting room was half full. People hunched over phones, some pacing, some staring blankly at the walls, as if their thoughts were drifting off. Walking louder than the world around me, I made my way to the front desk and cleared my throat. Someone had called me about Lorraine Mitchell. The nurse barely glanced up from her screen as I inquired about her. With a nod of confirmation, she directed me to room 214 down the hall, the third door on the left. Offering a quiet thanks, I began my journey down the corridor. Each step I took seemed to reverberate in the sterile hallway, growing heavier with each stride, until I finally arrived at her door. Pausing briefly outside, I found myself questioning my purpose there. What was I expected to say? What did she expect from me? These uncertainties swirled in my mind, leaving me feeling unprepared for what lay ahead. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door. Inside, Lorraine lay in bed, looking frail and more delicate than I had remembered. Her face was devoid of makeup, her hair unkempt, and her hands lay weakly on the hospital blanket. Multiple IV drips ran into her arm, and a heart monitor beeped rhythmically beside her. As she turned her head at the sound of the door opening, her eyes met mine, revealing a vulnerability I had never seen before. "Walter," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, trailing off as she spoke. The voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, as I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "You look like hell," I said with a weak, breathy chuckle. "I feel worse." I didn't sit down or move closer. Instead, I stood there staring at the woman who had once been my world, shattered it, and now lay in a hospital bed asking for me as if none of it had happened. "What do you want from me, Lorraine?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "Why am I here?" She swallowed and looked away for a moment before softly responding, "Because you're the only person who ever really knew me." I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair. "And yet you still left," I said. She flinched, curling her fingers into the blanket. "I was wrong. That's becoming a pattern with you." After a long pause, she whispered, "I don't know how to fix it." "You can't," I replied sharply. She swallowed, her lips parting slightly as the weight of her admission settled between us, heavy and suffocating. For so long, I had imagined what I had always wanted to face her, to make her understand even a fraction of the pain I had endured when she walked away. But standing before her now in her diminished state, I didn't feel victorious. Instead, exhaustion washed over me as I settled into the chair beside her bed, clasping my hands together. "You're not dying, are you?" I asked. She managed a faint laugh. "No, just pushed myself too far," she admitted, wincing as she shifted. "Turns out running away from everything eventually catches up with you." I remained silent, finally seeing Lorraine for who she truly was. Not the woman who had abandoned me, but someone who had lost herself in pursuit of happiness. In that moment, I realized I didn't harbor any hatred towards her. Whether that realization brought solace or added complexity, one thing was clear. No matter how much she regretted her actions, she had journeyed far from the person she once was. He had made his choice, and no amount of longing could turn back time. Some actions were irreversible. Perhaps that was the lesson we both needed to understand. The hospital environment could distort one's sense of time, almost isolating you from the world outside. Sitting next to Lorraine, I felt torn between my past life. With her in the future, I was trying to forge alone. The heart monitors beeping, the sterile antiseptic smell, her gaze filled with a mix of regret and wariness. It was overwhelming yet insufficient to make me leave. I reminded myself that I didn't owe her anything, yet I remained by her side. Lorraine shifted on the hospital bed, wincing with discomfort as she moved. "Walter," she spoke softly, "I know this won't change anything. I understand I can't undo my actions." I exhaled deeply, reclining in the chair with my arms folded. "Then why am I here?" She paused, then reached for the water cup on the tray next to her. I watched her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "Because I needed you to know the truth," I exhaled, sharply shaking my head. "I know the truth, Lorraine. You walked out on me. You picked someone else." My tone was even, but there was no mistaking the bitterness underneath. "What's left to say?" Her grip tightened around the cup. "I didn't pick him," I scoffed, leaning forward slightly. "Then what the hell do you call it?" She swallowed hard, staring down at her lap. "I was trying to run away." I blinked. "From what? From myself?" from what I thought I was supposed to be. She hesitated, then finally met my gaze. From you. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Wow, that makes me feel so much better. Her face twisted slightly. That's not what I meant. Then explain it to me, Lorraine, I said, voice harder now. Because from where I'm sitting it sure as hell looks like you threw away our marriage because you wanted something else. She looked away, inhaling deeply. In a moment of introspection, I confessed to Walter that I had lost sight of my identity. For so long I had been defined by our relationship by the expectations of others that I felt suffocated. The desperation in my voice was palpable as I shared my struggle. A glimmer of hope emerged when someone new entered my life, sparking the belief that I could rediscover myself and find solace. However, I soon realized that this person was not the solution and leaving was not the answer either. By the time I recognized my mistake, it was too late. As I bared my soul to Walter, my words barely rose above a whisper filled with remorse. He shook his head in disbelief, questioning whether I sought his sympathy or forgiveness. I confirmed that I didn't expect anything, leaving a heavy silence hanging in the air. Uncertainty clouded our exchange as I grappled with the weight of my actions and wondered if there was a path forward. After investing months in rebuilding myself following the aftermath of what I had done, the revelation of my departure not being due to a lack of love, but rather, T had been too lost to appreciate what she already had. The pain didn't disappear and nothing got fixed. However, for the first time I could see the real Lorraine. Not the woman who had left our home with packed bags, not the one who had treated me like a closed chapter in her life. This was a woman who had lost her way, and in turn lost me as well. Standing up, I saw her eyes widen slightly without a word. I put my hands in my pockets and looked down at her. I spent so long wondering why I wasn't enough for you, I said, my voice softer now. But I think I finally understand. It was never about me, was it? A tear rolled down her cheek as she shook her head, indicating no. I nodded slowly. That realization makes this easier, I said. She blinked, asking, what does? I exhaled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders after months of carrying it. Walking away, I did it this time. I left the hospital without a backward glance, no hesitations, and no lingering doubts. For months I had imagined this moment, what it would feel like to finally let her go. I thought it would be dramatic, maybe even painful. But as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not relief, just a quiet understanding that some things, no matter how much you want to fix them, are meant to stay broken. I stood by my car for a while, watching as the sky darkened above the hospital parking lot. Somewhere inside that building, Lorraine was lying in a hospital bed, dealing with the consequences of her choices. And for the first time, I realized that her pain wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I comprehended the reasons behind her actions. Why she decided to depart, why she returned only when all was lost. But those details no longer held significance, because genuine love does not cause destruction. It does not abandon. Sitting behind the wheel of my car, I took a deep breath, feeling the burden on my chest, which had weighed me down since the night she left, gradually lifting. Although it might never completely vanish, at least it was no longer dragging me down. Exiting the parking lot, I received a message from a long-lost friend inviting me for a drink. A smile crept onto my face. Perhaps it was time to start embracing opportunities again. Perhaps it was time to start truly living. Driving away from the hospital, from Lorraine, from all that once defined me, I finally realized. She had left me before, and now it was my turn to leave her behind for good.